I stood at the entrance of the Thorne estate, watching the elaborate wedding decorations shimmer under the afternoon sunday. Crystal chandeliers hung from temporary pavilions, white roses cascaded down marble columns, and a string quartet played softly near the ornamental fountain. Everything screamed old money and carefully curated elegance. I smoothed down my simple navy dress, the kind you could find at any department store, and took a deep breath. This was supposed to be a joyous occasion. My son Daniel was getting married. But as I walked through those gilded gates, a knot of unease twisted in my stomach. I had spent the last 15 years building an empire in silence. After my husband Thomas passed away, leaving behind not just grief but a groundbreaking patent we had developed together, I made a choice. We sold that technology for $47 million, a sum that could have changed Daniel's life overnight. But I watched how money corrupted people, how it turned children into entitled shadows of themselves, how it attracted vultures disguised as friends. So I hid it all. I invested through shell companies, bought failing businesses, turned them around, and built a financial empire that stretched across 3 continents. Daniel knew me as his widowed mother, who worked as a financial consultant living modestly in a 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. He never suspected that Emily Turner, the silent partner who had acquired over 30 companies in the last decade, was actually me, Eleanor Vance. I did it to protect him. I wanted Daniel to build his own life, earn his own success, find love for who he was, not what he had. And he did beautifully. He became a marketing director at a prestigious firm, bought his own condo, and fell in love with Serafina Thorne. Sarah, as she insisted everyone call her, came from what she described as old money. What she conveniently left out was that her family's fortune had evaporated in a series of disastrous investments, and her father, Richard Thorne, had lost almost everything before his company was quietly acquired and restructured by an anonymous investment fund 3 years ago. That fund was mine, of course. As I approached the receiving line, I could feel the weight of judgmental stares. Penelope Thorne, Sarah's mother, looked at me the way one might examine a questionable piece of fruit at the grocery store. Her eyes traveled from my simple dress to my practical pumps, and I could almost hear her mental calculations. Definitely not our class. Sarah stood beside her in a wedding gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, her smile bright and brittle as spun sugar. Mother Eleanor, Sarah said, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced politeness. So glad you could make it. Mom, Dad, this is Daniel's mother, Eleanor Vance. She's part of the family now. The way she emphasized part of made it clear I was considered a minor, somewhat embarrassing addition to their social circle. Richard Thorne, already on his 3rd glass of champagne, stepped forward with the false bonhomie of someone who had spent his life schmoozing at country clubs. Then he stopped. His face went through a remarkable transformation from polite interest to confusion, to something approaching shock. "Eleanor Vance," he said, slowly squinting at me. "Wait, you're not. You couldn't be." His voice rose slightly and nearby guests began to turn. "Emily Turner, you're Emily Turner, aren't you, the woman who bought my company 3 years ago?" The words dropped into the wedding reception like a grenade. Conversations stopped. The string quartet played on oblivious, but everyone else seemed frozen. I watched Sarah's face drain of color, watched Penelope's mouth fall open in a rather unflattering way, watched my son's expression shift from confusion to something darker. I kept my face perfectly composed, allowed myself only the slightest smile. "Mr. Thorne, how lovely to see you again." Again, Daniel's voice cut through the stunned silence. He pushed through the small crowd that had gathered, his eyes moving between me and Richard. "What is he talking about, Mom? What company? What is going on?" This was not how I wanted this to happen. Not here, not now, not on what should have been one of the happiest days of his life. But secrets have a way of choosing their own moment to surface, and this one had apparently decided that my son's wedding reception was the perfect stage. "Daniel," I began, but Richard, emboldened by alcohol and the attention, interrupted. "Your mother," he announced to anyone listening, "is Emily Turner, one of the most successful silent investors in the country. She bought my company when I was on the verge of bankruptcy. Paid cash, restructured the whole thing, and flipped it for triple the value within 2 years. I always wondered why she never showed up to any of the board meetings. Always sent that assistant of hers, what was his name, Sterling? James Sterling, actually my most trusted financial advisor, but I wasn't about to correct Richard at this moment. The damage was done. I could see it spreading across the reception like ripples in a pond. Whispers started, phones came out, and I knew that within minutes, people would be searching for Emily Turner online. Sarah recovered first, her social training kicking in. She laughed a high, brittle sound. "What a surprise, Daniel. You never mentioned your mother was so accomplished." but her eyes when they met mine were calculating. I had seen that look before in boardrooms and negotiations. It was the look of someone reassessing the value of an asset. Daniel just stood there, his face a mask of confused anger. "We need to talk," he said to me, his voice tight. "Now." I nodded and followed him away from the reception, through the manicured gardens, to a small gazebo overlooking a koi pond. The sounds of the party faded behind us, replaced by the gentle splash of water and the distant hum of traffic beyond the estate walls. 15 years, Daniel said, not looking at me. 15 years you've been lying to me. I never lied, I said quietly. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing. He turned on me then, and I saw tears in his eyes. Do you know how many times I worried about you? How many times I offered to help with bills, with expenses, and you always said you were fine? I thought you were struggling, Mom. I thought I needed to take care of you someday. And all this time you've been what, secretly rich? Yes, I said simply. Your father and I developed a technology together. When he died, I sold the patent. I used that money to invest to build something. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to have a normal life. I wanted you to work hard to earn things, to meet people who loved you for you, not for what you had. That wasn't your choice to make, he said bitterly. I'm 32 years old. When were you planning to tell me on your deathbed? I had no good answer for that. The truth was, I had told myself I would tell him when the time was right, but the right time never seemed to come. And now the worst possible time had arrived instead. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From having options, from being able to help you, from knowing who my own mother really is. He shook his head. I need time to process this. We'll talk later. He walked away back toward his new wife, and I stood alone in the gazebo, watching the koi swim in endless circles. I had built an empire, won countless negotiations, turned failing companies into success stories, but I could not fix the hurt in my son's eyes. The reception continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. I could feel the weight of new attention, of reassessment. Penelope Thorne, who had barely acknowledged me earlier, suddenly wanted to chat. Distant relatives of the Thornes who had ignored me now found reasons to introduce themselves. And Sarah, my new daughter-in-law, watched me with the focused intensity of a hawk spotting prey. I left early, citing a headache, which was not entirely a lie. As I drove back to my modest apartment, the same one I had lived in for 15 years despite being able to afford any mansion I wanted, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Not in hiding my wealth, but in the way it had been revealed. Daniel was angry, hurt, and confused. And Sarah, I suspected, was already planning something. I was right. The calls started the next morning. Cheerful, friendly calls from Sarah, apologizing for the awkwardness at the wedding, wanting to get to know me better, suggesting lunch. I agreed, curious to see where this was going. We met at an upscale restaurant in downtown Boston, the kind of place where a single appetizer cost more than a week's groceries. Sarah was all smiles and charm, asking about my work, my investments, my future plans. Then, over the main course, she got to the point. I've been thinking, she said, cutting her Chilean sea bass with surgical precision, about family legacy. Daniel and I want to start a charitable foundation, the Vance Thorne Family Foundation. We could do so much good, and it would be wonderful to have you involved. As the primary benefactor, of course. There it was, not even a week married, and she was already reaching for my wallet. How much are you thinking? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Well, she said, her smile widening, to make a real impact we would need at least $10 million to start, and I've been looking into governance structures. A family board would make the most sense, with voting rights distributed among key family members. Key family members, I repeated, meaning you, Daniel, your parents, and me. Exactly, although given my background in finance, I thought I might serve as the managing director. It only makes sense, really. You're so busy with your other investments. I set down my fork and really looked at her. She had done her homework quickly. Probably had her father pull what records he could find, hired someone to dig deeper. She knew enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be smart about it. That's an interesting proposal, I said. I'll think about it. Her smile faltered slightly. Of course. Take your time. Although I do hope we can move forward soon. There are some time-sensitive opportunities. Time-sensitive opportunities. Translation, she and her family were drowning in debt and needed cash fast. Daniel called me that evening. His voice was strained, careful. Mom Sarah mentioned the foundation idea. I think it could be good. A way for us to work together to build something as a family. Is that what you want, Daniel, or is that what Sarah wants? Why do you have to be like that? He said, frustration creeping into his voice. She's my wife. Her ideas are our ideas now. That's what marriage means. I closed my eyes, remembering being young and in love, how Thomas and I had faced the world together. But Thomas had never tried to use me, never saw me as a resource to exploit. He had been my partner in every sense of the word. I'll think about it, I told Daniel, echoing what I had said to Sarah. But I was not just thinking. I was acting. I called James Sterling, who had been my right hand for over a decade, and told him to prepare a complete financial analysis. Then I reached out to Catherine, an old friend from my consulting days who had become a lawyer specializing in corporate law. And finally, I contacted Michael, a retired private investigator who still owed me a favor from a case 5 years ago. I need you to look into someone, I told Michael. Thoroughly. Financial records, business dealings, phone records, if you can get them legally. Everything. Who's the target, he asked. My daughter-in-law. There was a pause. Family trouble? The worst kind, I said. The kind involving money. Michael worked fast. Within a week, I had a file 2 inches thick sitting on my dining room table. What I read made my blood run cold. Sarah had not just married my son. She had executed a carefully planned operation. The investigation revealed multiple new credit lines opened in the months before the wedding consultations with estate planning attorneys, and most damning of all, a recorded phone call between Sarah and her college roommate from 3 weeks before she met Daniel at a charity gala. In that call, Sarah laughed about being on a mission to find a man with money or connections. I'm not getting any younger, she had said, and Daddy's lost everything. If I'm going to maintain any kind of lifestyle, I need to marry up. Way up. Her roommate had asked about love, and Sarah had scoffed. Love is for people who can afford it. I need security. But the worst part, the part that made me want to scream, was what Michael had uncovered about her parents' finances. Richard and Penelope were not just broke. They were catastrophically in debt, facing potential bankruptcy within 6 months. And Sarah had been systematically transferring their remaining assets into shell companies that she controlled, essentially stealing from her own parents while they remained oblivious. She was positioning herself to let them fall while she climbed over their wreckage. I sat in my quiet apartment listening to that recorded call over and over, hearing my son's wife casually discuss her calculated hunt for a meal ticket. The woman Daniel loved, the woman he had pledged his life to, had never loved him at all. He was just a means to an end. I spent a sleepless night wrestling with what to do. Part of me wanted to show Daniel immediately to rip off the bandage and let him see the truth. But another part, the part that had learned patience through years of long-term investments and strategic planning, knew that revelation needed to be timed correctly. If I came at Sarah directly, she would paint me as a jealous, controlling mother-in-law. She would turn Daniel against me even further, make him choose between us, and in his current state of hurt and confusion, I was not sure which way he would fall. The decision was made for me 2 weeks later when Sarah made her next move. She sent me a formal invitation to lunch this time, including Daniel and her parents. The venue was a private dining room at an exclusive club. When I arrived, James Sterling by my side for moral support, I found them all waiting. Richard and Penelope looked uncomfortable, Daniel looked resigned, and Sarah looked triumphant. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor Sarah said, gesturing to a seat at the head of the table. "We have a proposal we'd like to discuss." She slid a leather portfolio across the table. Inside was a detailed proposal for the Vance Thorne Family Foundation, complete with bylaws, governance structure, and a budget that took my breath away. She was not asking for $10 million. She was asking for $50 million with an annual operating budget of $5 million, all to be managed by a board that she would effectively control. "This is quite ambitious," I said mildly. "We want to do real good," Daniel said, but he would not meet my eyes. "Education, healthcare, supporting young entrepreneurs, things that matter." "And who would manage the day-to-day operations?" "I would," Sarah said smoothly. "With appropriate compensation, of course. A managing director's salary for a foundation of this size would be around $300,000 per year plus expenses." I almost laughed. She wanted me to give her $50 million and then pay her $300,000 a year to spend it. It was audacious. I had to give her that. "I need to think about this," I said, starting to close the portfolio. "Actually," Sarah said, and her voice took on a harder edge, "I was hoping we could finalize this today. You see, I've done my research, Eleanor. Or should I call you Emily? I know about your holdings, your investments. I know you're sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars while living in that sad little apartment. It's time to share that wealth with your family. With Daniel. Unless," and here she paused significantly, "you want people to start asking questions about how you acquired all that money." about whether all your business dealings were entirely ethical. There it was, the threat I had been waiting for. Are you threatening me, Serafina? I asked quietly. I'm encouraging transparency, she said with a smile. Surely someone with nothing to hide would be happy to have their business practices examined. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Penelope stared at her plate. Daniel looked stricken, and I felt something inside me snap. Not break, but snap into place like a puzzle piece finding its slot. I see, I said. Then I suppose we need to have a different conversation, one about transparency. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. This is a recording from March 15th, 3 weeks before my son met you at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala. I hit play. Sarah's voice filled the room clear and damning. Her casual discussion of finding a rich man to marry her dismissal of love, her cold calculation. As the recording played, I watched Daniel's face crumble. He looked at his wife of less than a month as if seeing her for the first time. That's illegal, Sarah said, but her voice shook. You can't record people without their consent. I didn't record it, I said calmly. Your friend did. She was so concerned about your welfare that she kept a record of your conversations. She gave this to an investigator when he explained you might be in danger. Emotional danger from your own desperation. You had me investigated. Sarah's composure was cracking. After you tried to extort $50 million from me, yes, I had you investigated. I pulled out the thick file Michael had prepared. Would you like me to continue? Should we discuss the credit cards you've opened using your parents' information, the property transfers you've made without their knowledge, the shell companies registered in Delaware? Richard's head snapped up. What property transfers? I slid a set of documents toward him. Your daughter has been systematically moving your assets out of your names and into corporate entities she controls. The beach house in Cape Cod, the stock portfolio your father left you, even the life insurance policies. She's been preparing for your bankruptcy, making sure she gets everything before the creditors can. Penelope made a small, wounded sound. Richard stared at the documents, his face reddening. Serafina, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Tell me this isn't true. Daddy, I can explain. I was trying to protect yourself, I finished. You saw your parents drowning, and instead of throwing them a life preserver, you went through their pockets. You can't prove any of this, Sarah said, but she was backed into a corner now, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Actually, I can. I have bank records, transfer documents, and communications with your lawyer Mark Davies about estate planning strategies. All legally obtained, I assure you. Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked at Sarah with an expression of such profound betrayal that even I felt a pang of sympathy. Is this true, any of it? Sarah's mouth opened and closed. Finally, she went on the offensive, the way cornered predators do. So what if I was practical? So what if I wanted security? Do you know what it's like to watch your family lose everything, to go from private schools and summer homes to worrying about bills? I did what I had to do to survive. You married me for money I didn't even have, Daniel said, his voice hollow. I married you for potential, Sarah shot back. And I was right, wasn't I? Your mother is worth hundreds of millions. That makes you valuable, Daniel. That makes us valuable together. The slap came from an unexpected direction. Richard Thorne, who had been sitting frozen, suddenly stood and struck his daughter across the face. The sound echoed in the private dining room. Penelope gasped. Daniel flinched. How dare you, Richard said, his voice shaking with fury. How dare you use us, use him, use everyone. You're no daughter of mine. Sarah held her reddening cheek, tears springing to her eyes, but I was not sure if they were from pain or anger. Fine, she spat. Fine, I want a divorce, Daniel. And I want half of everything. Half of what your mother has been hiding from you. Daniel just looked at her, his face a mask of devastation, and walked out. I heard his footsteps echoing down the hallway and then the slam of a door. Sarah turned to me, venom in her eyes. You think you've won? I'll take you apart. I'll file complaints with the SEC about your business practices. I'll make sure every newspaper knows about the mysterious Emily Turner who hides her wealth while her son lives a middle-class life. I'll destroy you. I stood up, slowly gathering my documents. You can try, I said. But let me be very clear about something, Serafina. I am not a piggy bank for you to raid. I am not a helpless old woman you can manipulate. I have been building and protecting my fortune for 15 years, dealing with people far more dangerous and intelligent than you. You're a small-time grifter who got lucky and landed a rich target. But your luck just ran out. I left them there, Sarah, furious and crying, Richard and Penelope in stunned silence. James Sterling followed me out and we walked to where my car was parked. That went well, James said dryly. It's not over, I replied. She's going to fight. And fight she did. Within 3 days, I received notice that Sarah had filed for divorce and was seeking a massive settlement, claiming that I had hidden assets that should have been disclosed before the marriage. She argued that Daniel, as my son, had a reasonable expectation of future inheritance, and that my concealment of wealth constituted fraud. It was a legal reach, but with the right lawyer, she might make it stick. Then came the SEC complaint. Sarah had hired Mark Davies, a lawyer known for aggressive litigation tactics, and together they filed a formal complaint alleging that my investment activities constituted insider trading and market manipulation. They claimed I had used undisclosed information to acquire companies at artificially depressed prices. It was nonsense, all of it, but the filing itself was damaging. The SEC would have to investigate, and during that time my reputation would be under a cloud. James Sterling called an emergency meeting with my legal team. This is serious, he said. Even if the charges are baseless, the investigation will tie up assets, freeze accounts, and damage your business relationships. She's trying to force a settlement by making continued operation impossible. What are my options? I asked. Catherine, my lawyer friend who had joined my legal team, leaned forward. We can fight it, of course. Your records are clean, your transactions were all legal and properly reported. But it will take months, maybe years, to clear your name completely. Or, she paused, we can make her a different kind of offer. One she can't refuse without destroying herself. I'm listening. Over the next week, we crafted a strategy. It was ruthless, elegant, and perfectly legal. I would offer Sarah a way out, but on my terms. The meeting was set for James Sterling's office, a sleek space high above the Boston financial district. Sarah arrived with Mark Davies, both of them radiating confidence. Daniel came too, though. He sat apart, looking like he had not slept in days. Richard Thorne also attended, having been informed that the future of his financial survival depended on this meeting. Thank you all for coming, I began, standing at the head of the conference table. I'll be direct. Serafina, you've filed for divorce and you want money. You've also filed a complaint with the SEC, hoping to pressure me into settlement. So let's settle. Mark Davies leaned forward. We're prepared to negotiate, but my client's demands are... I held up a hand. I'm not negotiating. I'm dictating terms. Sarah will withdraw all legal filings within 24 hours. All of them. The divorce proceedings, the SEC complaint, everything. And why would she do that? Davies asked with a smirk. Because in exchange, I will ensure her parents don't end up homeless and bankrupt. I will pay off their debts, provide them with a home and a modest but comfortable income for life. They will be taken care of. Richard's head jerked up, hope flashing in his eyes. However, I continued, Sarah herself will receive nothing directly from me. Instead, I will invest $5 million into a fund that she will manage. But there are conditions. All investment decisions must be approved by me. All profits returned to me. She will receive a modest management salary, $50,000 per year, but she will have no access to the principal. She will work for me, effectively managing money she cannot touch. That's slavery, Sarah burst out. That's employment, I corrected. You wanted to demonstrate your financial acumen, your value. Here's your chance. Prove you can make money legitimately instead of stealing it. Succeed, and after 5 years I might increase your management fee. Fail and you lose even that. And if I refuse, then I release everything. The recordings, the documents showing how you defrauded your parents, the evidence of your marriage fraud. I will sue you for every form of liability I can imagine. Defamation, fraud, emotional distress. I will make sure that you spend the next decade in court burning through any money you might have left. And your parents, they'll face bankruptcy without my help, and you'll watch them lose everything because you were too greedy to accept a reasonable offer. Mark Davies whispered urgently in Sarah's ear. Richard Thorne stared at his daughter with a mixture of disgust and desperation. Daniel sat perfectly still, barely breathing. You're blackmailing me, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I'm offering you a choice, I replied. A job or a legal war you cannot win. Your parents' security or their destruction. It's up to you. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic far below. Sarah looked at her father, at Mark Davies, and finally at me. I saw the moment she realized she had no cards left to play. She had gambled everything on a bluff, and I had called her on it. How long do I have to decide? She asked finally, her voice small. You just did, I said. Accept now or I walk out and my lawyers file their countersuit within the hour. I'm a busy woman, Serafina. I don't have time for games. Mark Davies tried one more time. Mrs. Vance, surely we can negotiate more favorable. No, I said flatly. This offer expires when I leave this room. Sarah looked at Daniel, perhaps hoping for support, but he turned away. She had burned that bridge to ash. Finally, shoulders sagging, she nodded. I accept. Good, I said. James will draw up the paperwork. You'll sign it before you leave. And Serafina, if you violate any term of this agreement, if you speak publicly about our arrangement, if you try to manipulate Daniel again, I will not be merciful a second time. The documents were signed within an hour. Sarah left without another word, Mark Davies hurrying after her. Richard Thorne approached me hesitantly. Mrs. Vance, he said. I don't know how to thank you. We didn't know what Sarah was doing. I know I said not unkindly, she played all of us. But you and Penelope will be fine. I'll have my people contact you about the arrangements. He nodded and left, looking 10 years older than he had at the wedding. That left just Daniel and me in the conference room. He stood by the window looking out at the city below. I was a fool, he said finally. You were in love, I replied. That's different. Is it I should have seen the signs? The questions about your finances, the pushing for that foundation, the way she always steered conversations toward money. Love makes us want to see the best in people. There's no shame in that. He turned to face me and I saw tears on his cheeks. Why didn't you tell me about the money, about who you really are? Maybe if I'd known, I wouldn't have been such an easy target. This was the question I had been dreading, the one I had no good answer for. I thought I was protecting you. I wanted you to have a normal life, to make real friends, to find someone who loved you for you. I saw what money did to people, how it twisted their relationships and values. I thought if you didn't know, you'd be safe. But I wasn't safe, Daniel said. I was vulnerable. I was an easy mark because I didn't know what I was worth, what my family was worth. You tried to protect me by keeping secrets, and all you did was make me an easier target. His words hit like physical blows, each one landing because they were true. I had made a mistake, a costly one. My good intentions had paved a road to Daniel's heartbreak. You're right, I said quietly. I was wrong. I should have trusted you with the truth. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry. We stood there in that conference room, mother and son, separated by years of secrets and miles of misunderstanding. Then Daniel crossed the distance between us and pulled me into a hug. He was crying and I realized I was too. I'm angry at you, he said into my shoulder. I'm hurt and confused, and I don't know if I can forgive you right away. But you're still my mom, and you saved me from making an even bigger mistake. I love you, I said. Everything I did, even the things I did wrong, came from love. I know, he said, I know. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Daniel moved out of the condo he had shared with Sarah and stayed with me for a while in my modest apartment. We talked, really talked, sometimes late into the night. I told him about his father, about the patent we had developed, about the early investments, and the lucky breaks, and the hard work that had built my empire. I showed him financial statements, introduced him to James Sterling, brought him into the world I had kept hidden for so long. He was angry, sometimes hurt other times, but gradually understanding grew. He began to see why I had made the choices I did, even if he did not entirely agree with them. And I began to understand how my secrecy had made him vulnerable, how honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, was ultimately kinder than protective lies. Sarah, true to the agreement, withdrew all her legal actions and began managing the $5 million fund I had established. Reports came back that she was actually quite good at it, her finance degree finally being put to legitimate use. She made no attempts to contact Daniel, which was for the best. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. Richard and Penelope Thorne moved into a comfortable townhouse I purchased through one of my holding companies. They never knew the money came from me. They believed it was part of Sarah's settlement agreement. It was better that way. Their dignity was preserved, and they could live out their retirement without the shame of knowing their daughter had tried to steal from them. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Daniel came to me with a request. I want to work with you, he said. Not because of the money, but because I want to understand what you built. I want to be part of it. Are you sure? I asked. This isn't a guilt-driven decision. I'm sure, he said firmly. You built something remarkable, Mom. Something worth being proud of. I want to learn from you. And maybe someday I want to build something too. So Daniel joined my business, starting from the ground up, despite my offers to give him a management position. He wanted to earn it, to understand every aspect of the operation. He worked with James Sterling, learning investment strategies. He sat in on acquisitions, studied market analyses, absorbed everything like a sponge. And slowly our relationship healed. Not back to what it was that innocence was gone forever, but into something new, something built on honesty and mutual respect rather than protective secrets. A year after the disaster of his first wedding, Daniel met Sarah at a community investment seminar. She was a teacher who ran a nonprofit helping underprivileged students access financial literacy education. She had no family money, no social ambitions, just a genuine desire to make the world a little better. When Daniel brought her to meet me, I did not hide who I was. I told her everything up front. "That's incredible," Sarah said when I finished explaining my history. "You built all that and stayed grounded. That takes real character." "Not as much character as you might think," I said. "I made plenty of mistakes along the way." "But you learned from them," she replied. "That's what matters." I liked Sarah immediately. More importantly, I could see that Daniel loved her for the right reasons. There was no calculation in their relationship, no hidden agendas, just two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and shared values. 2 years after his first wedding, Daniel and Sarah got married in a small ceremony at a botanical garden. No elaborate estate, no crystal chandeliers, just close friends and family under an autumn sky. When they exchanged vows, I could see the difference in Daniel's eyes. This time he was marrying someone who saw him not what he represented or what she could get from him. As for me, I made some changes too. I sold my modest apartment and bought a comfortable townhouse with a garden. Nothing ostentatious, but a place where I could breathe. I established the Thomas Vance Foundation, named after my late husband, to support young engineers and inventors with promising ideas but limited resources. It was not run by family but by professionals who understood innovation and could recognize genuine potential. I attended the first grant ceremony and watched as young people barely out of college received funding that would change their lives. One of them, a 23-year-old woman from rural Montana, cried when she received her check. She reminded me of myself and Thomas decades ago, full of dreams and raw talent but lacking resources. I also began mentoring other women in business, particularly older women who had been overlooked or underestimated because of their age. I shared my story selectively, carefully, but I shared it. The response was overwhelming. Women reached out to tell me about their own hidden talents, their deferred dreams, their struggles to be taken seriously in a world that often dismissed them. One evening, about 3 years after Daniel's ill-fated first wedding, I sat in my garden watching the sunset. Daniel and Sarah were coming for dinner, and I had spent the afternoon cooking something I rarely had time for in my years of building the empire. My phone rang, an unknown number. "Mrs. Vance," a woman's voice said. "This is Seraphina Thorne. Seraphina Davies now. I've gone back to my maiden name." I felt my body tense automatically. "Seraphina, this is unexpected." "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," she said, her voice lacking the sharp edge I remembered. "But I wanted to call you. I owe you that much." "You don't owe me anything," I said carefully. "We had an agreement. You've honored it." "I've done more than honor it," she said. "The fund you gave me to manage, it's grown by 43% over 3 years. I've finally done something legitimate, something I can be proud of. And I wanted to thank you." "Thank me. I forced you into that arrangement." "You gave me a chance," she said quietly. "You could have destroyed me completely. You had every right to. Instead, you gave me a job, a purpose, and a way to prove I was more than a con artist. I hated you for it at first. I spent months fantasizing about revenge, about ways to break free. But then something changed. I started to enjoy the work. I started to feel proud when I made good investment decisions. I realized this was the first time in my life I was building something real instead of stealing it." I was quiet, processing this unexpected confession. "I destroyed my marriage to your son," Sarah continued. "I hurt people I claimed to care about. I became exactly the kind of person I once despised. And you stopped me. You held up a mirror and forced me to see what I'd become. So yes, Mrs. Vance, I'm thanking you. Even though you had every reason to hate me, you still gave me a path forward." "What will you do now?" I asked. "After the 5 years are up." "I'd like to keep working for you if you'll have me," she said. "Not managing that original fund, but maybe something else. I've been taking classes at night, getting properly certified. I want to build my own reputation the right way this time. And if you ever need someone who understands what it's like to come back from rock bottom, someone who knows exactly how low human nature can go, I'm here." We talked for another 20 minutes. It was not forgiveness, not exactly. What Sarah had done to Daniel, to her parents, to me, could not be erased by good investment returns and a change of heart, but it was acknowledgement of harm done, and a genuine attempt at restitution. When we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about second chances and redemption. Daniel and Sarah arrived shortly after carrying bags of fresh bread from the bakery Sarah loved. We ate dinner in the garden as the stars came out talking about everything and nothing. Daniel told stories about his latest acquisition project. Sarah shared updates about her nonprofit's expansion into 3 new school districts, and I listened feeling something I had not felt in years: contentment. After dinner, as Sarah helped me clear the dishes, Daniel pulled me aside. "Mom, there's something I want to ask you," he said, his expression serious. My heart skipped. "What is it?" "Sarah and I have been talking, and we want to expand her nonprofit. Really expand it, take it national. But we need funding, significant funding. And I wanted to ask you, not as a son asking his mother for money, but as a business partner asking an investor if she'd be interested in supporting something worthwhile." I smiled. "Tell me about the business plan." We spent the next hour going over projections, discussing strategy, talking about impact metrics and sustainability models. Daniel had learned well. His presentation was professional, thorough, and realistic. He was not asking for a handout. He was proposing an investment in something that mattered. "I'm in," I said when he finished, "but on one condition." "What's that?" "You let me be actively involved. Not just as a funder, but as an advisor. I want to help build this with you." Daniel's face broke into a genuine smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." Sarah joined us then, and we toasted with wine to the future of what would become the Vance Educational Initiative. It would take 2 years to fully launch, but when it did, it would provide financial literacy, education, and mentorship to over 50,000 students annually. And at its core would be a simple principle that everyone deserves to understand money, to make informed decisions, and to build secure futures for themselves. 4 years after that disastrous wedding day at the Thorne Estate, I stood in a high school auditorium in Detroit, watching Daniel give a presentation to a room full of students about financial planning and investment basics. Sarah stood beside me, both of us wearing volunteer badges. "He's good at this," Sarah whispered. "He gets it from his father," I said. "Thomas always had a gift for explaining complex things simply." "And from you," Sarah added. "The drive to help others, to use resources for good. That's all you." I thought about Thomas, about the patent we had developed together, about the choices I had made after his death. I had hidden my wealth to protect Daniel, and that secrecy had nearly cost him everything. But in the end, the truth had emerged, painful and messy as it was. And from that truth, we had built something better. The students were engaged, asking questions, taking notes. I saw myself in some of their faces, the hunger for knowledge, the desire to escape whatever circumstances had brought them to this auditorium on a Saturday morning. One girl, maybe 16, raised her hand. "But Mr. Vance," she said, "what if you come from nothing? What if your family has no money to invest, no connections, no way to even start?" Daniel smiled at her. "That's exactly where my mother started. She and my father had an idea and worked incredibly hard to make it real. It wasn't about connections or inherited wealth. It was about recognizing opportunity, taking calculated risks, and never stopping learning. You're here today asking questions and trying to understand. That's already the first step." After the presentation, several students approached with more questions. I watched Daniel and Sarah patiently answer each one, treating every teenager with the same respect and attention they would give a CEO. This, I thought, was what wealth should do. Not elevate the holder above others, but provide the resources to lift others up. As we packed up to leave, Richard Thorne appeared in the doorway of the auditorium. I had not seen him in over a year, and he looked older, grayer, but somehow more at peace. "Eleanor," he said, approaching carefully, "I hope I'm not intruding. I saw the announcement about today's session in the paper." "Richard, how are you?" "Better," he said. "Penelope and I are doing better. We've downsized our expectations, simplified our lives. It's been good for us, actually. Clarifying. I'm glad I said and I meant it." "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for that day at the wedding, for being drunk and thoughtless and revealing your secret like that. Penelope and I both owe you an apology for how we treated you, how we judged you based on appearances." "It's in the past," I said. "It's not, though," he insisted. "We spent our lives chasing status and impressing people who didn't matter. We raised our daughter to value all the wrong things. And when everything fell apart, the only person who helped us was the one we had looked down on. That's a lesson we won't forget." Daniel joined us then, and there was an awkward moment as he faced his former father-in-law. But Richard extended his hand. "Your mother is a remarkable woman," Richard said. "I'm glad you have her." Daniel shook his hand. "So am I." As we drove home that evening, Daniel was quiet, reflective. Finally, he spoke. Do you ever regret it, the way everything happened, the secrecy, the revelation, all of it? I thought about his question carefully. I regret the pain it caused you. I regret that you had to learn the truth the way you did. But do I regret protecting my wealth and using it to build something meaningful? No. Do I regret that the situation with Sarah forced both of us to confront hard truths? No. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. I've been thinking about Sarah, Daniel said. About the phone call you told me about, the one from a few years ago. Do you think people can really change? I think people can choose to change, I said. Whether that change is genuine or performative, only time tells. Sarah chose to take the opportunity I gave her and do something positive with it. That doesn't erase what she did, but it's something. Would you ever trust her again? Trust is earned through consistent behavior over time, I said. She's made progress, but trust, that would take many more years. Why do you ask? Because I wonder if I'm too cynical now, Daniel said. If what she did broke something in me that makes it hard to believe people can be genuine. Sarah, who had been quiet in the back seat, leaned forward. You believed in me, she said softly. You trusted me even after what happened with Sarah. That's not cynicism. That's wisdom. You learn to look deeper, to ask harder questions, to not accept surface appearances. That's not broken, Daniel. That's grown. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw tears in Sarah's eyes. She understood perhaps better than anyone how much courage it had taken for Daniel to love again after such profound betrayal. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, and I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that disastrous wedding day to this moment of peace and purpose, we had traveled a difficult road. But we had traveled it together, and we had emerged stronger. Later that night, alone in my study, I pulled out an old photograph of Thomas and me from 3 decades ago. We were young, full of dreams, standing in our first apartment, holding a prototype of the technology that would change our lives. Thomas was grinning at the camera, proud and hopeful. I touched his face gently, remembering. We did it, I whispered to the photo. Not the way we planned and not without mistakes, but we built something that matters, something that's helping people. I hope you're proud. I imagined he would be. Thomas had never cared about wealth for its own sake. He cared about solving problems, helping people, making the world a little better. The foundation bearing his name was doing exactly that. And Daniel, our son, was carrying on that legacy in his own way. The next morning, James Sterling called with news. The Vance Educational Initiative has received a major grant from the Department of Education, he said, excitement clear in his voice. They want to use it as a model program for nationwide expansion. Eleanor, this is huge. How huge? Huge enough that you'll need to hire a full administrative team. Huge enough that within 5 years you could be reaching 1 million students. I sat down processing this information. 1 million students learning financial literacy, getting the tools to make informed decisions, building secure futures. It was more than I had ever imagined when I sold that patent all those years ago. Let's do it, I said. But James, I want to do it right. No cutting corners, no compromising the quality of the program. If we're going to scale up, we scale up properly. Understood. I'll start putting together the team. Over the next year, the Vance Educational Initiative expanded rapidly. We hired educators, developed curriculum, created online platforms and in-person workshops. Daniel took on more responsibility, becoming the public face of the program, while I worked behind the scenes on strategy and funding. Sarah developed the teacher training programs, ensuring that the people delivering our content were properly prepared. And slowly, quietly, I began stepping back from my other business interests. I was 65 years old, and while I still had energy and drive, I was starting to think about legacy in different terms. Not just what I could build, but what I could pass on. Not just wealth, but wisdom. Not just success, but significance. One evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Serafina arrived at my townhouse looking nervous. I'm sorry to just show up, she said, but I have something I need to say in person. I invited her in, curious. We sat in my living room, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The 5 years are up, Sarah said finally. As of last week, the fund management agreement has ended. I know, I said. James sent me the final reports. You did excellent work. I want to give it back, she said. Give what back? The management fees, all of it, $250,000 over 5 years. I want to donate it to the Vance Educational Initiative. I was genuinely surprised. Sarah, that's your money. You earned it. I earned it with a chance you gave me when you had every reason not to, she said, and I want to do something meaningful with it, something that helps kids avoid becoming what I became. someone who saw people as resources to exploit instead of human beings to respect. I looked at this young woman, now 33 years old, and saw someone different from the calculating social climber who had married my son. Time and consequences had worn away. The sharp edges revealed something more genuine underneath. "I'll accept your donation," I said, "on one condition. You come work for the initiative, not as a favor, but because we need someone who understands finance and can help us manage our rapid growth sustainably. You'd hire me, after everything." "I'd hire the person you've become," I said, "not the person you were. There's a difference." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your kindness." "Probably not," I agreed. "But I'm not giving it to you because you deserve it. I'm giving it to you because the program needs talented people and you're talented. Also because I believe in second chances as long as they're earned. You've earned this one." She accepted, and within a month, Sarah joined the initiative's financial management team. It was strange at first working with my former daughter-in-law, the woman who had tried to exploit me and broken my son's heart. But Sarah kept her head down, worked hard, and proved herself day by day. Daniel was hesitant about the arrangement, but he respected my decision. "If you can forgive her, I can work with her," he said. "But I don't know if I can ever forget what she did." "I'm not asking you to forget," I told him. "I'm asking you to let her prove she's changed. There's a difference between forgiveness and foolishness." 2 years after Sarah joined the initiative, we held a gala fundraiser to support the program's expansion. It was a far cry from that elaborate wedding at the Thorne estate, but it was beautiful in its own way. The venue was decorated simply but elegantly, and instead of society columns, we had students sharing their stories of how financial literacy had changed their lives. I stood at the podium looking out at a room full of donors, educators, and students. Daniel and Sarah sat in the front row holding hands. James Sterling was there, as was Catherine. Richard and Penelope Thorne sat in the back, both of them volunteers now with the program. And Sarah stood to the side, managing the logistics of the event with quiet efficiency. 15 years ago, I made a choice to hide my wealth. I thought I was protecting my son from the corrupting influence of money from people who would see him as a resource rather than a person. I was wrong about the method, but right about the problem. Money changes how people see you, treat you, value you, and that's why financial literacy is so important. Not just so you can manage money, but so you can understand it, demystify it, take away its power to corrupt relationships. I told my story then, not all of it, but enough. I talked about losing Thomas, about building a business empire in secret, about the choice to reveal my wealth and the chaos that followed. I talked about broken trust and hard lessons and the long road to healing. I learned that secrets, even well-intentioned ones, create vulnerabilities, I said. I learned that the best protection we can give people is not to hide reality from them, but to give them the tools to navigate reality successfully. And I learned that it's never too late to change course, to admit mistakes, and to build something better. The applause was warm and sustained. After the formal program ended, people approached to share their own stories. A woman in her 50s told me about finally understanding her retirement accounts. A young man talked about starting his first business after taking our entrepreneur workshop. A teenage girl showed me her scholarship application for a finance program, something she never would have considered before our curriculum reached her school. This, I thought, was what success really looked like. Not a secret empire managed from the shadows, but transparent impact made in community with others. Not wealth hoarded, but resources shared. Not protection through isolation, but empowerment through education. Late that night, after the gala had ended and the venue was cleared, I sat with Daniel and Sarah in the empty ballroom. The three of us were exhausted but satisfied, passing a bottle of champagne between us. "Mom," Daniel said, "I've been thinking about something. About what you said in your speech about secrets and protection. I understand now why you did what you did, even if I disagree with parts of it. But I want you to know I'm not angry anymore. I haven't been for a long time." I felt a weight I had been carrying for years suddenly lift. "Thank you," I said. "That means everything. And I want to thank you," he continued, "for showing me that success isn't about how much you accumulate, but what you do with what you have. For teaching me, even in painful ways, that character matters more than comfort. For being strong enough to admit your mistakes and wise enough to change course." Sarah raised her glass. "To Eleanor," she said, "the most dangerous grandmother our future children will ever have." We laughed, and I realized Sarah was right. If Daniel and she had children, I would be a grandmother someday. A rich grandmother with a complicated past and hard-won wisdom. I hoped I would do better by my grandchildren than I had initially done by my son. I hoped I would find the balance between protection and honesty, between providing support and allowing independence. But that was a bridge to cross in the future. For now, I had this moment sitting with my son and his wife, celebrating a meaningful achievement, feeling genuinely content with the person I had become and the life I had built from the ruins of secrecy and betrayal. The years that followed were perhaps the best of my life. The initiative continued to grow, reaching more students, developing new programs, partnering with schools and community organizations across the country. Daniel matured into a skilled administrator and compassionate educator. Sarah's nonprofit work merged with ours, creating synergies neither organization could have achieved alone. And Sarah, quietly and without fanfare, became one of our most valuable team members, her understanding of financial systems and her reformed perspective on wealth, making her particularly effective at designing programs for at-risk youth. I kept in touch with Richard and Penelope, who had reinvented themselves as volunteer financial counselors for seniors, using their own experience of near bankruptcy to help others avoid similar fates. It turned out that losing everything had given them something more valuable: perspective, humility, and purpose. James Sterling eventually retired, handing over his duties to a younger protege, but he remained on my personal board of advisors, offering wisdom when requested. Catherine continued her legal practice, but also taught pro bono legal clinics through our initiative, helping young entrepreneurs understand contracts and business structures. Michael, the retired private investigator who had helped expose Sarah's schemes, became a regular volunteer, teaching students about critical thinking, research skills, and how to identify financial scams. He had a particular gift for connecting with at-risk youth, and many of them responded to his straight-talking style. I watched my network of relationships transform from the isolated protective walls I had built around myself into a genuine community of people working toward common goals. I learned that vulnerability, the thing I had spent so long trying to avoid, was actually the foundation of real connection. By being honest about my mistakes, my fears, and my journey, I gave others permission to be honest about theirs. On my 70th birthday, Daniel and Sarah threw me a surprise party at the initiative's headquarters. They had invited students, staff, donors, and volunteers, people from every phase of my journey. Even Sarah was there, bringing a carefully chosen gift, a framed photograph of the first student cohort. She had personally mentored all of them, now in college on scholarships. "They remind me that people can change," she told me quietly, "that our worst moments don't have to define our whole story." No, I agreed, they don't. But our best moments, the ones where we choose growth over comfort, honesty over pretense, service over self-interest, those can define us if we let them. As I looked around the room at the faces of people whose lives had intersected with mine, I thought about that day at the Thorne estate when my secret was revealed. That moment had felt like the end of everything, the destruction of the careful life I had built. But it had actually been a beginning. The end of hiding and the beginning of living authentically. The end of protective isolation and the beginning of meaningful community. The end of fear-based decisions and the beginning of purpose-driven choices. I thought about the young woman I had been when Thomas died, frightened and alone with a newborn son and a fortune I did not know how to manage. I thought about the middle-aged woman I had become, powerful but isolated, protected but disconnected. And I looked at the older woman I was now, less wealthy on paper after years of giving, but infinitely richer in the things that actually mattered: relationships, purpose, and peace. "Speech," someone called out, and others took up the chant. Daniel handed me a microphone, grinning. I looked out at the crowd and felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I said simply. "Thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you for teaching me that the greatest wealth isn't what you hide in accounts or bury in secret investments. It's what you share, what you build together, what you pass on to others." I spent years trying to protect my son from the corrupting influence of wealth, but what I learned is that wealth doesn't corrupt. Fear corrupts. Secrecy corrupts. Isolation corrupts. Wealth used openly and purposefully in community with others can be a force for tremendous good. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I made many mistakes in my life. I hid when I should have been honest. I protected when I should have empowered. I built walls when I should have built bridges. But I also learned, grew, and changed. And if an old woman like me can learn new ways of being, then anyone can. It's never too late to choose differently, to be better, to build something meaningful from even the most painful experiences. The applause was thunderous, but what I remember most clearly is not the sound, but the faces: Daniel proud and tearful, Sarah beaming with affection, Sarah openly crying with what looked like genuine joy. Richard and Penelope holding hands and smiling, James nodding approval, Catherine raising her glass, Michael giving me a thumbs up, and dozens of students, the real reason for all of it, looking at me with hope and possibility in their eyes. After the party, as I drove home through the quiet streets, I thought about revenge, that bitter satisfaction I had felt when I first exposed Sarah's schemes and forced her into that restricted employment arrangement. I had wanted her to suffer, to pay for what she had done to Daniel, to me, to her own parents, and she had paid in her own way. But something unexpected had happened along the journey from revenge to resolution. She had changed, genuinely changed, and in the process, so had I. I realized that the best revenge was not forcing someone to live in the shadow of their worst self, but giving them the opportunity to become their best self and then watching them rise to meet it. The best revenge was not destroying your enemy, but transforming them into someone who is no longer your enemy at all. The best revenge was living so well, so purposefully, so authentically that the people who once wished you harm ended up wishing they had your wisdom, your peace, your ability to turn pain into purpose. When I walked into my townhouse that night, I did not feel like a woman who had been victimized and fought back. I felt like a woman who had lived a full, complex, meaningful life, made mistakes, learned from them, and ultimately created something worth far more than the fortune I had spent years hiding. I had created a legacy of education, empowerment, and second chances. I had rebuilt my relationship with my son on a foundation of honesty instead of secrets. I had transformed enemies into colleagues, betrayal into opportunity, pain into wisdom. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my small balcony, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Thomas was looking down, and I hoped he was proud. Not because I had been perfect, but because I had been real. Not because I had avoided mistakes, but because I had faced them. Not because I had protected our son from all harm, but because I had taught him how to recover from harm and grow stronger in the breaking. I did my best, I said to the stars, to Thomas, to the universe. It wasn't always the right thing, but it was always from love. And in the end, love found a way. The stars sparkled in the darkness, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves. I thought about tomorrow, about the initiative meeting in the morning, about the new curriculum we were developing, about the thousands of students whose lives would be changed by what we were building together. I thought about Daniel and Sarah, about the family they might create, about the grandmother I hoped to be. And I thought about Seraphina, about Richard and Penelope, about all the people who had hurt me or whom I had hurt in return, and I felt something I never expected to feel: forgiveness. Not the kind that erases the past or pretends harm never happened, but the kind that acknowledges pain, learns from it, and then releases its power to define the future. That night I slept deeply and dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who has finally made peace with their choices, their mistakes, and their complicated, beautiful, hard-won life. The girl who had lost her husband too young, the woman who had hidden her success from the world, the mother who had made painful mistakes trying to protect her child, the tycoon who had wielded power from the shadows, all of these versions of myself had led to this moment, an older woman, wiser and humbler, who had learned that the most dangerous thing you can do with power is hide it, and the most powerful thing you can do is share it. 15 years ago, I chose to hide. For many years after that, I chose to hide better, more completely, more protectively. But now, finally, I chose to live openly, messily, authentically. And in that choice, I found something I had been searching for all along without even knowing it. Not safety, not protection, not invulnerability, but genuine connection, real purpose, and the deep satisfaction that comes from using your resources, your experience, and your hard-won wisdom to light the way for others. The absence of my enemies no longer frightened me. Their presence no longer defined me. I had moved beyond the binary of victim and victor, beyond the cycle of harm and revenge, into something more nuanced and more true, a life lived not in reaction to others, but in response to my own deepest values. A life where wealth was a tool, not a trophy, where mistakes were lessons, not failures, where even betrayal could become a teacher if you were brave enough to learn its lessons. And that, I realized, was the only revenge worth taking, becoming so fully yourself, so purposeful, so genuinely content, that those who once tried to diminish you can only stand back and wonder how they ever thought you were someone who could be used.